Welcome to the Plate Tectonics Lab. Today we will be continuing the discussion of plate tectonics, including a brief description of Earth's composition, where the plates tie in, the mechanisms behind the different types of plate boundaries, and their prominent geological features. First, we'll start with some background information to provide you context for this week's lab. Earth is composed of distinct layers, each with unique properties and composition. The innermost layer is the inner core. It's made of solid iron and is approximately 1,270 kilometers in diameter. The inner core has extremely high temperature and pressure. Surrounding the inner core is the outer core, which is approximately 2,200 kilometers thick and composed of molten iron and nickel that moves in convective currents that help generate Earth's magnetic field. Surrounding the outer core is the lower mantle, which is 2,850 kilometers thick and composed of hot plastic rock that moves in slow convection currents which drive plate tectonics. Finally, the crust is the outermost layer of Earth. It is between 5 and 70 kilometers thick and has two main types, oceanic and continental crust, which differ in identity and composition. Although the last slide showed the overall summary of Earth's layers, we can also look at Earth's chemistry and physics to gain a deeper understanding of our planet. From a chemical perspective, Earth can be divided into the core, mostly iron and nickel, the mantle, silicate rocks, and the crust, less dense rocks. From a physical or mechanical perspective, Earth can be divided into the inner core, solid, the outer core, molten, the mantle, viscous and partially molten, the asthenosphere, weak or plastic, and the lithosphere, brittle and rigid. Chemical layers are derived from Earth's formation and can be distinguished by distinct elements and minerals. Physical layers, on the other hand, occur due to convection currents and can be distinguished by temperature, pressure, viscosity, and plasticity. Boundaries between chemical layers are distinct, while boundaries between physical layers are gradational. Understanding both views gives additional insight into Earth's composition and the forces shaping our planet. Chemical and physical models complement each other in geology. Something else you'll notice in this figure is that the asthenosphere isn't uniform. This can be explained by the principle of isostasy. Isostasy refers to the way Earth balances and supports its weight. It acts like a buoyancy system, like how wood blocks float in water. Lighter continental crust floats higher above the mantle than dense oceanic crust. Mountains have deep roots below to compensate for high elevation. Like an iceberg floating, most of the mass is below the surface. Isostasy maintains equilibrium so that the lighter parts of the lithosphere float at appropriate levels on top of the ductile mantle. Isostasy affects several key areas of interest in Earth science, including topography and landscape, responses to erosion and glaciation, gravity measurements, and plate tectonics. Understanding isostasy gives insight into Earth's structure, surface features, and responses to geologic processes over time. As a reminder, there are three main types of plate boundaries. Divergent boundaries occur where plates move apart, and magma is allowed to rise to the surface. At divergent boundaries, you'll see the creation of new crust and seafloor. An example of divergent boundaries would be mid-ocean ridges. Convergent boundaries occur where plates collide and move together. Oftentimes, dense oceanic crust is subducted under lighter continental crust. At convergent boundaries, where a continental crust meets another continental crust, you'll see the formation of mountains. An example of a convergent boundary would be the Pacific Ring of Fire. Finally, transform boundaries occur where plates slide past each other. In this situation, new crust is neither created nor destroyed. In transform boundaries, you'll see lots of earthquake and fault activity. An example of a transform boundary would be the San Andreas Fault. Plate motions at these three boundary types drive many geologic processes and features on Earth, from earthquakes to mountain building. Understanding plate boundaries helps explain the location of volcanoes, trenches, faults, and more. Taking a deeper look into the different boundary types, we'll start with divergent boundaries. Again, a divergent boundary is where two tectonic plates are moving apart from each other. Key characteristics include occurring along mid-ocean ridges where new oceanic crust is formed, hot magma rising up and solidifying as the two plates separate, rift valleys and volcanism on the seafloor, and divergent boundaries can eventually form new oceans and continents. Some examples of divergent boundaries on our planet include the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which separates North and South America from Europe and Africa, the East African Rift Valley, which is an early stage of continent splitting in Africa, the Red Sea Rift, which is a land bridge between Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. Some of the effects of divergent boundaries include basaltic eruptions and underwater volcanoes, hydrothermal vents on ocean ridges, earthquake activity, and the transformation of land over millions of years. Divergent boundaries play a key role in plate tectonics, shaping Earth's surface through seafloor spreading and continent rifting. A convergent boundary is where two tectonic plates collide and one usually slides underneath the other. Key characteristics include occurring where oceanic and continental plates meet, the denser oceanic crust subducting under the lighter continental crust. These often result in major earthquake and volcanic activities. There are three different types of convergence: oceanic continental, where an oceanic plate meets a continental plate, and the subduction of the oceanic plate results in volcanoes on land on the continental plate. An example of this would be the Juan de Fuca plate subducting underneath the North American plate to create the volcanoes that we see on the northwestern portion of the United States. The next type is oceanic-oceanic, where two oceanic plates are converging, and the result is the subduction of one oceanic plate beneath the other, which results in the formation of deep trenches. The last example, or the last type of convergence, is continent-continent, where two continental plates are converging, and that results in mountains like the Himalayan mountains. Some of the effects of convergent boundaries include violent earthquakes where the plates are meeting, the melting of subducted crust forming magma for volcanoes, uplift and deformation creating mountain ranges, and the formation of deep oceanic trenches. Convergent boundaries profoundly impact earthquakes, volcanism, and mountain building processes on continents. A transform boundary is where two tectonic plates slide past each other horizontally with little vertical motion. Key characteristics include strike-slip boundaries, plates moving perpendicular to the boundary, lots of earthquake activity but no subduction. Several examples include the San Andreas Fault, which is where the Pacific and North American plates grind past each other, the Alpine Fault, which is the boundary between Pacific and Australian plates through New Zealand, the Dead Sea Transform Fault, which links the Red Sea divergent boundary to the convergent boundary in Turkey. The effects of transform boundaries include shallow earthquakes with epicenters along the boundary. They can break up continents that were once joined. Vertical faults, rift valleys, and pulverized rock characterize transform boundaries. And finally, a zigzag plate versus a straight line, as shown in the top left-hand figure here. Unlike divergent and convergent boundaries, transform faults do not create or destroy crust, but they are important for accommodating plate motions. Next, we'll discuss information that you'll need to complete this lab. Fortunately, there are no safety considerations specific to this lab. When going through the lab, make sure you pay special attention to the units in the quiz questions in case you need to make conversions. Just in case you haven't had to calculate velocity in a while, remember that velocity is equal to distance divided by time. You'll need a computer or an iPad with the most recent desktop version of Google Earth. Unfortunately, the browser version of Google Earth will not work for this assignment. For digital supplies, you'll need to use Google Earth for this lab, and all of the KMZ files used for Google Earth will be provided in the instruction page of this lab's module on Carmen.